Let me see here. Okay. And okay, we are recording. All right, thank you all for being here. Thanks for joining our webinar on Midas Gold and other Idaho mining threats. I am going to share my screen momentarily and we have a slide deck for you, but I want to briefly introduce you to the folks that are on this call today. We have our panelists, which are John Robison from Idaho Conservation League. He is the ICL Public Lands Director and has been working with ICL since 2002. Works on a lot of mining issues here in Idaho and has been a really key player in working with Advocates for the West on our mining work. So we're really glad to have John on the call. And then we also have Mike Lopez as our other guest panelist. He is Senior Staff Attorney for the Nez Perce Tribe Office of Legal Counsel, and he has been in that role from 2007 to 2015, and then returned to the position in 2016. He works with the tribe on a number of legal matters and has also been a close ally of ours in work that we are dealing with the Nez Perce Tribe and the Nez Perce OLC. So we're really glad to have Mike on board. He is also an Advocates for the West board member. So welcome, Mike. On our staff, we have Amanda Rogerson, who is staff attorney. She has been with our Boise office for just over a year now and came to us after 4 years working with the Nez Perce tribe as a staff attorney. So we're really glad to have Amanda on board. She works with the tribe a lot on cases that we work with the tribe on a lot, particularly Midas Gold work. And lastly, we have Bryan Hurlbutt, who has been a staff attorney with Advocates for going on 9 years. And he also works closely with Idaho Conservation League on a wide variety of mining cases and does a lot of Clean Water Act work and other case work with Advocates for the West. We're really happy to have everybody here. I just want to acknowledge before we start that some of what we're going to be discussing is active litigation. So there may be questions that come up throughout the presentation that you have, and we welcome you to ask those questions using the Q&A button, which you will see on the bottom portion of your screen. If there are any questions that we will not be able to answer, I'm just going to skip over them, but please feel free to ask questions and we'll do the best we can to answer those at the end of the presentation. So the way this works is I am just going to hop off and let our panelists take over. I'll be running a slideshow for them for the presentation, which I'm going to start. I'm going to do a little screen share so that you can see what we're talking about here in just a second. And okay, so I'm going to hand it off here to our first presenter, which is John Robison from ICL. Take it away, John.
Hey, thanks, Anna. And we can go ahead with the next slide to keep things moving along. I really appreciate everyone taking their time today. And one of the reasons we're in these situations where we are really concerned about mining operations affecting public health, water quality, and our quality of life, and mining in really sensitive areas that from our perspective are really high risk, is because of the mining law of 1872, and it was passed in 1872 to promote expansion, European expansion of the West. And I don't know if anyone's been out recreating on the trails or rivers recently. The West has been discovered, and so it was really a law for a different time. A couple interesting elements that we're still dealing with today are the legacy of the 1872 mining law. These include the fact that billions of tons of metals and minerals have been removed from public lands for free, with no royalties going back to the public. And this is very different from oil and gas and other types of extractive industries. So foreign mining company can come in and remove billions of dollars and take them back home, and they might give folks a job helping dig them out for them, but we really have to buy them back if we want them. The other element is that mining is the highest and best use of the land, where Congress basically said these areas are open to mining unless they're specifically withdrawn. And so federal agencies like the Forest Service or BLM can put some design features in effort to minimize the impacts, but they really don't have the authority to say no. And that's one of the reasons why that conservation groups often work really hard on legislation for wilderness and other protective measures that remove these areas from future mineral entry. So anyway, that's kind of the legacy we're dealing with is 1872 mining law, and it really puts some antiquated sideboards on these discussions and forces conversations like the one we're having today. So next slide. So talk a little bit about the primary threats and impacts from mining. And these are large scale operations. We're not talking about, you know, pickaxes and mules anymore. Next slide. So the on-site impacts are significant, tends to be potentially thousands of acres. And so these include both the obvious mine pits, but also you think about all the non-ore bearing material on top of those that has to go someplace. And so that material often has to go in another adjacent valley. And so you can actually lose that habitat and that landscape as well. And then because you have to sift through a lot of ore to get to the metals that companies want, you actually have these tailings or leftovers that can also occupy entire drainages. So the impacts are quite significant in terms of the actual footprint. Next slide. Now, one of the reasons that we're so concerned about mining is the public health concerns. And so on the left is a map showing mining projects under development. So you've got the Stibnite Gold project, Thompson Creek. These might be recent projects or upcoming projects. And then on the right, we have Idaho's hazardous waste sites. And this map was put together by the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. Next slide. Just to zoom in on an inset of that, you can see that the Idaho's hazardous waste areas that pose public health problems often overlap with mines. And so you've got the Blackbird Mine, Stibnite Mine, the Triumph Mine, and so on and so forth. So mining operations not only contain hazardous materials among themselves for operations, but also the actual process of mining inadvertently liberates and frees up and mobilizes a lot of contaminants that are direct health threats, whether it's lead or arsenic or cadmium or other heavy metals and things like that. Next slide. So the other issue, and aside from the footprint of the pit and the tailings and the waste rock piles and the infrastructure of roads and facilities and all the like, the problem that a lot of these projects pose is that the contaminants don't stay on site. They happen to flow downstream either in surface or groundwater or get carried away by air currents. And so this is a photo of the Animas River below the Gold King mine, which is a historic mine that had a catastrophic blowout. And the effects went so far downriver as to affect hundreds of miles of the Animas River. And as a result, some folks decided to stop irrigating the crops over the health concerns on that. Next slide. So again, water quality is a huge issue. Certainly for drinking water, on the left, this is the Blackbird Creek outside of Salmon, below the Blackbird Mine. And on the right is a water from in the Fort Belknap Reservation in Montana, downstream of the Zortman-Landusky mine. So water quality is a huge concern to the public. And what's even concern for issues like the Stibnite Gold project is that threatened and endangered fish are extremely sensitive, far more sensitive to humans for contaminants like copper and things like that. So when things go downstream, they can have effects far, far away from the mine site. Next slide. So with that, I wanted to pass this on to Bryan Hurlbutt, who's going to talk a little bit about how the role that Advocates has been as a partner working with ICL and other clients in terms of trying to protect public health and our public lands.
Thanks, John. As Anna said, I'm Bryan Hurlbutt. I'm a staff attorney at Advocates for the West, and I've been fortunate enough for the last 8 or so years to work on a number of cases to protect Idaho and the landscapes and waters that we love and care about from mining impacts. For anyone who's not familiar with Advocates, we're a public interest environmental law firm. We're a nonprofit. We represent conservation groups, tribes like the Nez Perce tribe, and others free of charge, all on cases to protect the environment, usually enforcing our bedrock federal environmental laws. There's 3 areas that our mining work falls into, which you can see from this slide. Some of that's cleaning up historical mine sites. We're also keeping an eye on mines that are operating in Idaho. And then what we'll be talking a lot about through a number of cases I'm going to present about here, and then in more depth, the Stibnite Gold project for Midas Gold is keeping new mines out of sensitive locations where we don't think they belong. Next slide. Before I go through some of our cases that have worked on over the last 8 years, I'll just give a really quick kind of primer on what kind of laws are out there. As John mentioned, the 1872 mining law creates a little bit of a Wild West scenario where mining companies are allowed to go in there and mine for the most part. But that said, there are federal environmental laws that help protect our public lands and air quality, water quality, and wildlife. That gives us hooks in some of these legal cases. So the public land management laws, there's a couple different things there. One is certain types of lands receive higher protections, like John mentioned, wilderness areas, and also national parks. Typically, those are no longer open for new mining, with some exceptions. But even on just general national forest, Forest Service lands where you might be out hiking this summer, or BLM lands, where you'll be out in the desert this fall, there are still laws and regulations that apply there that where mining is going to go forward, the impacts need to be minimized and reduced to protect the environment. There are also pollution laws, sorry, still on the last slide, like the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act that generally require mining companies to get permits if they're going to discharge pollutants to our waters and to the air, and they need to reduce the levels of pollution that they release so that they meet public health standards and standards for fish and wildlife. There's wildlife protection laws like the Endangered Species Act, and there's also NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. We're mostly talking about mining on public lands. I think something like 40% of the western US is public lands, which is mostly Forest Service and BLM lands. And when a mining company wants to get approval to do something on public lands, they submit a proposal to the Forest Service or BLM, and the agency under NEPA has to prepare an environmental document that studies and discloses the likely impacts of the proposal. They need to take public comment on what the mining company is proposing, and the agency has to also consider alternatives. Are there alternative ways to approve the project that might have less of an environmental impact? So those are the main laws that we use. Next slide. So in the category of historical mines, where we're trying to clean up what's left behind from past mining, it's important to note that long after a big mining project ends, the impacts last. And even long after the mining company leaves, the impacts last. This is the Triumph mine site on the East Fork of the Big Wood River. I think we have some attendees from the Wood River Valley, Ketchum, Sun Valley, Haley, and other communities. And maybe some of you have fished the Big Wood, or others who visited the Pioneer Mountains to hike. But this mine site was mined heavily from the 1880s through about the 1950s for silver, lead, and zinc. And some cleanup was done. The state of Idaho worked with at least one of the mining companies who put up a fair amount of money for some cleanup for a little while. But then the mining company went bankrupt, left the site, and now the state of Idaho and us taxpayers are left paying for the rest of the cleanup. And while some cleanup was done, unfortunately, there's still more to do. Back in 2017, Idaho Conservation League was visiting the site with members from the State Department of Environmental Quality and other agencies. This is a picture of the site on the left. I was standing next to an old portal, which is a big tunnel into the mountain that sort of links up with all the different mine tunnels. Water sinks through there as the snow melts every year, builds up, trickles out, and can be pretty polluted. You'll also see in the bottom left part of that photo on the left, an area without as much vegetation. That's one of the old mine waste piles. Water also builds up there. The water from both the portal and from that waste pile come together in the ditch that's at the bottom of the waste pile. And as you'll see in the picture at the right, it's not always like that, but sometimes it turns a pretty nasty color and carries a lot of pollutants straight towards the East Fork of the Big Wood River. And that's what Idaho Conservation League discovered when they were there in 2017, that was happening. We brought a case against the state for not having a Clean Water Act permit for this pollution discharge. We were able to settle the case, and the state's now in the process of getting a Clean Water Act permit, which is supposed to come out this year. And when that permit comes out, we expect the state will have to install some kind of treatment facility to make sure that there's not too much contamination reaching the East Fork. Next slide. To save a little time, I'm not going to go into this one, but we also do watchdog operating mines. There are mines operating in Idaho. We're not only talking about new mines or old mines. There are mines like the Galena mine producing silver. We do watch what's going on with their pollution discharge, make sure they're meeting their permits. Next slide. And now I'm going to shift our focus to a lot of our work, which is on keeping new mines out of places where we don't think they belong. We're going to start in the Boise River watershed. As any of you know who live in Boise or elsewhere in the Treasure Valley, the Boise River is a really valuable asset to our community. We're really lucky to live in a place where we're in a big city, at least by Western or Idaho standards, but we have a very clean river flowing through town. This has been particularly true this year. I know for my family and a lot of our friends, summer activities are somewhat limited, especially water activities. And so my wife and my kids and our dogs, we've been going down to the Boise River a lot this summer. And we're really fortunate to have a nice clean river that we can play in. Downstream on the Boise River, there are pollution problems from agriculture. But again, it's pretty clean through the city of Boise. And above that, it's the threats from new mines that pose the biggest risk. So we've been involved in two cases that I'm going to talk about. First is the Atlanta Gold case. This is at the base of the Sawtooth Mountains in the headwaters of the Boise River near the town of Atlanta, Idaho. A picture on the left is from the area where Atlanta Gold, a mining company, has been trying to build a gold mine looking across towards the Sawtooths. The picture on the right shows polluted water that's coming out of some historic mine tunnels and areas where Atlanta Gold's been exploring and hoping to build their new mine. Before I started at Advocates around maybe 10 years ago, we started on behalf of Idaho Conservation League a series of Clean Water Act cases. The mining company wasn't treating this water, didn't have Clean Water Act permits. And through a series of successful cases leading up through the last year, we've won multiple victories against Atlanta Gold. The court has now ordered them to pay about $2.5 million in civil penalties and contempt of court penalties for their ongoing pollution discharges. And so far to this day, they haven't built a mine. Next slide. Moving to a different corner of the Boise River watershed. This is in the headwaters of Grimes Creek, roughly between Idaho City and Garden Valley. A Canadian mining company, Kumho, hopes to build what it claims would be the world's largest open pit molybdenum mine. The picture on the left shows beaver ponds at the headwaters of Grimes Creek, right at the base of where the mine would be built. The picture on the right shows one of our law clerks doing some summer field work, standing on one of the neighboring mountains looking across at the mountain that essentially would be the open pit if the mine was ever built. And Kumho hasn't submitted an actual mine plan yet. First, they're trying to do exploration work. So they've proposed to the Forest Service building 10 miles of roads across the mountain so that they can drill around 250 drill holes up to 3,000 feet deep to map out what mineral resources might be there. We've won 2 cases now over the last 7 years, stopping the mine exploration from moving forward so far. We've been representing the Idaho Conservation League, along with Idaho Rivers United and the Golden Eagle Audubon Society, in cases against the Forest Service, challenging the Forest Service's approval of the mine exploration work. The first case we won based on the Forest Service's failure to look at the potential water quality impacts from drilling all those holes deep underground. And then the second case we won based on a special little plant. The middle picture you'll see there, that's one of my daughter's fingers pointing at the tiny Sacagawea's bitterroot, the cool little flower that pops out for just a short 2-week period in late spring, early summer after the snow melts. In the picture there, it's not flowering anymore, but the leaves are still there. It's found only in a few places all in central Idaho up high. It was only discovered to be a unique species in 2006. And this Kumo mine exploration area happens to be the place where more of it's been found than anywhere else in the world. And so it's very important to protect. Next slide. Another area where we don't want to see mining is in the Centennial Mountains along the Continental Divide in eastern Idaho. Another mining company called Midas Gold has touted the site as potentially having being a good location to build a large open pit gold mine. Similar to Kumo, Midas Gold submitted a plan to the Forest Service to build roads throughout this exploration site and do a bunch of drilling to map out resources. And we similarly have succeeded in court in stopping that for now. This is an Idaho Conservation League and Greater Yellowstone Coalition case against the U.S. Forest Service. We just prevailed on that earlier this spring, and as of now, the project is stopped until the mining company and the Forest Service can go back and adequately assess the environmental impacts. Next slide. And now we're moving to the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. As we've said a couple times already, generally wilderness areas are withdrawn from mining, but there are some exceptions in some areas where pre-existing mining rights can be grandfathered in. The Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness in central Idaho is the largest contiguous wilderness in the lower 48 states and the largest forested wilderness. It's a pretty special place, but when the wilderness was created, there was a bit of a grace period where miners and mining companies were allowed to continue looking for minerals, and if they found a valuable deposit, they might be eligible to maintain some mining rights even after the wilderness was designated. The Golden Hand site is an area where a mining company has been looking at building a gold mine in the Big Creek watershed. It's inside the wilderness. The mining company hasn't yet proved that it has these grandfathered rights, but it submitted a proposal a number of years back to the Forest Service seeking authorization to build a road into the wilderness, to drive in vehicles and heavy machinery to drill and excavate trenches. And the mining company was saying this is just for the purpose of looking at things they'd already looked at just to help confirm what they had already found. We thought it looked more like a fishing expedition to try and do new exploration work. And so again, we went to court against the Forest Service representing the Idaho Conservation League, Wilderness Society, Earthworks, Friends of the Clearwater, and Wilderness Watch. And once again, we won our case and have stopped that project from moving forward for now. Next slide. And so now we're moving to the South Fork of the Salmon River watershed. This is actually not far from the Golden Hand site that we just talked about and not far from the boundary of the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness. We're going to talk about Midas Gold's proposed mine at the historic Stibnite Mine site. I'm going to pass this off to others to get into more details, but as a quick way of introduction, this mine site is east of McCall. It's in the headwaters of the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River. It's in the Nez Perce tribe's territory, and with the exception of some private land that the mining company owns in the middle of it, much of the site is in the Payette and Boise National Forests on our public lands. It has been mined in the past. As you can see here in this picture, that's an old mining pit that the East Fork of the South Fork now flows through as it heads through the mining site. But over recent decades, EPA and the Forest Service have done some cleanup actions to try and restore the site. But about 10 years ago, a Canadian mining company, Midas Gold, started showing an interest in the site and doing some exploration work. And in 2016, Midas Gold submitted a plan for an actual mine to the Forest Service. This is a massive new mining project that would involve 3 new open pits. Midas would also fill the undisturbed headwaters that you can't really see in this picture of Meadow Creek with about a 460-foot tall and nearly 1 mile long pile of mining waste rock. And just recently, the Forest Service, who has to review the project and decide whether and how to approve it, released their draft environmental study for public comment. So I'm going to turn this over to others. Mike Lopez is going to discuss the Nez Perce tribe and how mining has deeply impacted the tribe over the years, and talk about the tribe's concerns with the Midas Gold project and Stibnite site. Then Amanda is going to talk about the current Clean Water Act case for the tribe that is underway against Midas Gold. And then we'll go back to John to end by talking about the draft environmental study that's out and opportunities for public comment. So Mike.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for participating today. Again, my name is Mike Lopez. I'm a staff attorney, and I have the privilege of representing the Nez Perce tribe. We cannot talk about the Stibnite mining area without talking about the Nez Perce tribe. As Brian noted, the area is located within the Nez Perce tribe's Aboriginal territory, which encompasses more than 17 million acres spanning present-day Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and parts of Montana. In 1855, the Nez Perce tribe entered into a treaty with the United States government, reserving for its exclusive use and benefit about 7.5 million acres, 17 million acre homeland, including an area, including that, 7.5 million acres of its 17 million acre homeland. They also reserve certain rights central to their culture and way of life, and that includes the right of taking fish at all usual and accustomed places in common with citizens of the territory, and of erecting temporary buildings for curing, together with the privilege of hunting, gathering roots and berries, and pasturing their horses and cattle upon open and unclaimed land. Following the Nez Perce tribe's 1855 treaty, about 5 years later, in 1860, gold was discovered within the tribe's exclusive homeland, and following discovery of this gold near present-day Orofino, there was a huge influx of non-Indian miners onto the tribe's reservation. These miners disregarded instructions issued by the Indian agent and the superintendent charged with administering the reservation to vacate the land, and the tribe's reservation was quickly. So in response to this trespass, the United States government turned its focus to negotiating a new treaty with the tribe, and one that would reduce the tribe's reservation with the aim of reducing conflicts between the tribes and would-be miners. And the United States government's negotiations with the tribe culminated in another treaty in 1863, in which the tribe ceded to the United States approximately 90% of the land.
Mike, did we lose you entirely? Are you still there?
Yes, looks like you just lost me temporarily. My apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're all good. Thanks.
My apologies to the participants on the phone. The 1863 treaty also importantly preserved the rights the tribe reserved in its 1855 treaty to hunt, fish, gather, and pasture on open and unclaimed land off reservation and within its homeland. The 1863 treaty led to the 1877 Nez Perce War and the flight of Chief Joseph, as you can see on this slide here. When the United States government came to the Wallowa Valley and ordered Chief Joseph and the Wallowa band to leave the area and move to the smaller reservation, Chief Joseph refused, and military conflict ensued. And he fled the area with the Wallowa band, and you can see the route here that he and the Nez Perce took, fleeing from the United States military. And they traveled about 1,100 miles across several states, all the way up to the Canadian border, where ultimately the Nez Perce surrendered. But during the course of this military conflict, over 200 men, women, and children, Nimipu children, died or were wounded in that campaign. Next slide, please.
Oh.
So this map here shows the vast Nez Perce Aboriginal territory that I discussed before. As you can see in the light blue there, that area extends all the way down the Columbia River and all the way east to Montana, or Buffalo Country, as the Nez Perce refer to, and then the southeast Washington, northeast Oregon, and parts of north central Idaho. Next slide, please. And this is a close-up of the area of the former 1855 reservation in light brown there, and you can see the current reservation in red. That gray area is the Indian Claims Commission area, and that's an area that the United States, through the Indian Claims Commission, adjudicated in 1967 to be of exclusive use and occupancy of the Nez Perce tribe. And you can see down there at the bottom right corner, within the ICC territory, that blue star is where the Stibnite Gold Project is located. Next slide, please. So following the passage of the 1872 mining law, miners arrived around 1900 to the Stibnite area during the Thunder Mountain Gold Rush, looking for gold and silver. And in the 1930s, the Bradley Mining Company began a serious large-scale open pit mining operations at the Stibnite site. It was part of the World War II war effort, where antimony and tungsten was mined. Antimony is used in batteries and metal and ammunition, flame retardant materials, and other materials. Tungsten is used in electrodes, heating elements, steel, filaments, and light bulbs and cathode tubes. And during this time that Bradley Mining Company was mining in the 1940s, there were more than 750 people living and working in the Stibnite site year-round. It was the largest producer of antimony and tungsten in the country for a period, and the largest producer of gold in Idaho. The town of Stibnite had a hospital, a school, a recreation center, a ski hill, and a bowling alley. Between 1939 and 1952, over 256,000 ounces of gold was mined in that area, and approximately 1.5 million ounces of silver. When Bradley, just finishing up the last slide, when Bradley ended the mining in the late 1950s, the Stibnite houses were moved to Yellowpine, McCall, Cascade, Riggins, and New Meadows. And then it was actively mined by various mining companies, including Hecla, up until 1996 using a heap leach process. As Bryan indicated, since then, the late 1990s. In 2001, September of 2001, the site was proposed for listing on the national priorities list under the Superfund statute, and the state of Idaho opposed that designation. And instead, the state opted to work with the federal government to try to clean up the site, but not being listed on the NPL. And although there has been a lot of cleanup activity at the site since then, it still remains heavily contaminated. Next slide, please. So why does the tribe care about the Stibnite site today? The site remains heavily contaminated. The tribe is very concerned about its treaty reserved fishing, hunting, and gathering rights in the area. And the tribe wants the site to be cleaned up. They want it to be comprehensively cleaned. They want it to be clean so that its treaty rights and resources and cultural resources and use of the area remains protected now and in the future. And they want their tribal members to be able to access the site safely and to do it in a way that doesn't threaten their human health. So with that, Amanda is going to talk about more about the Stibnite site and about the tribe's litigation under the Clean Water Act. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Had to get it off mute there. My name is Amanda Rogerson. I'm a staff attorney with Advocates for the West. And as Mike alluded to, the tribe remains very concerned about the contamination at the Stibnite site. And as Bryan mentioned, Midas began acquiring patented and unpatented mining claims at the site in about 2009, and it has since acquired mining claims for the whole site where it's proposing its new mine, the Stibnite Gold project. So the tribe's current litigation does not relate to the Stibnite Gold project. It relates to ongoing pollution discharges at the site. The tribe filed its lawsuit in August of 2019, so just about a year ago. And in that lawsuit, it basically alleges that in the intervening 10 years since Midas arrived at the site and began acquiring mining claims at the site, that Midas has failed to address the ongoing pollution discharges that are coming out of old mine features and seeps at the site, and that it also failed to acquire its legally required NPDES permits. That's the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits that are required under the Clean Water Act for pollution discharges. So it's a pretty simple case, and that's sort of the nuts and the bolts of it. Can you go to the next slide, Anna? I'm not seeing the slides progressing. I don't know if that's just.
I did go to the next slide.
Okay.
I see it progress.
So essentially, under the Clean Water Act, a person or entity is liable for discharging pollutants without a NPDES permit if that person is the owner or operator of the facility or activity. And so the tribe has alleged in its lawsuit that Midas, as the owner and or operator of its mining claims, patented and unpatented, up at the Stibnite site, is illegally discharging pollutants and has been since they started acquiring those claims. Next slide.
So this is the one with the listed
pollutants.
got it?
For some reason, I think other folks are having that problem I'm seeing in the comments. So essentially, the tribe has alleged that Midas continues to discharge aluminum, antimony, arsenic, cyanide, iron, manganese, mercury, and thallium from these point sources at the site. So these areas that are sort of discharging polluted water. And on the left side of the screen there, you can see a photo of one of those discharge locations at the site. Next slide. Here on the right is actually a map of the point source, the point source areas at the site. So those dots on the map are where the discharges are coming from. And then the colored squares are Midas's patented mining claims at the site. So when a mining company acquires a patented mining claim, that's basically acquiring the land as the owner, whereas an unpatented mining claim is a claim on top of land that's still held by the US government, but the ownership of the claim comes with certain rights to explore and develop minerals there. So here, the map on the right sort of shows also some of the water bodies that the tribe is alleging Midas is discharging pollutants into. And specifically those water bodies are Meadow Creek, Fiddle Creek, and Sugar Creek, which are all tributaries to the East Fork, South Fork Salmon River, which also flows through the site. Next slide. So the case is currently pending in Idaho District Court in front of Judge Windmill. And really the latest development is that on August 18th, Midas sued the US Forest Service, alleging that the Forest Service is actually legally responsible for the point sources that the pollution point sources that the tribe identified on Midas's unpatented mining claims. So saying that the Forest Service as the actual owner of that land is responsible. And then Midas has additionally motioned the court to combine the two lawsuits. And that motion is still pending in front of Judge Windmill. And that's pretty much where we are. It's pretty simple. We've been moving through the case, but it's a pretty simple just case about pollution and ongoing pollution issues up at the site, which are affecting waters that house Nez Perce treaty reserved fish and other aquatic resources, and in which downstream of which, the site Nez Perce tribe members continue to fish and engage in other fishery restoration work. In the meanwhile, Midas continues to move through the permitting process for their proposed mine. So I might turn it back over to John Robison to talk about that a little.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda. I really appreciate that. And so what's going on right now, this is an overview from the recently released draft environmental impact statement that the public has until October 13th to review and submit comments on. And just for a note, I've been involved in tracking mining issues for over 18 years, and this is by far the most complicated, complex, long-lasting project that I've ever seen. The Stibnite Gold project is actually so complex and so potentially damaging that it took the contractors over an extra year to complete the draft EIS, and there's still a lot of unfinished sections in there. And despite being presented as a restoration project, more than half of the direct disturbance is on previously undisturbed and intact landscapes. In fact, the environmental impact statement is so long, and the impacts are so lasting in terms of the project that the combined document and its appendices are over 5,000 pages long. And again, the public just has a short amount of time to review the project. From our quick review to date, it seems that there's a lot of concerns. All alternatives will lead to what seems like a 20% direct loss in Chinook salmon habitat and over a 27% loss in critical bull trout habitat. Salmon, steelhead, and bull trout need cold, clear water, and it appears that all alternatives will raise the water temperatures downstream of the project area. The South Fork of the salmon supports the best remaining habitat for summer Chinook salmon in the entire Columbia River Basin. And so keeping that water clean and pristine and cold is going to be incredibly important for salmon recovery. Just on one thing on the slide there, you can see that it's this is a zoomed out version, and there's a lot more than just the impacts on site. You've got transportation issues and new roads. You've got new facilities being constructed and power lines upgraded and the like. So it's a really long area. and it can affect, so the project's effects will expand far beyond just the watershed itself and really into the heart of the community. Next slide. One thing that I wanted to point out here is that the project, and again, we're going to have a follow-up webinar at some point with kind of a deeper dive into some of these issues, but despite some creative components on the side for restoration here and there, at its heart, at its core, this remains an open pit cyanide vat leach mine, kind of an old school mine process. And it is involves 3 open pits, one of which is underneath the riverbed of the East Fork of the South Fork of the Salmon River. And so when, and so there's lots of unanswered questions in there. One thing I wanted to highlight here, kind of a big take-home message, is that these are public lands that belong to you. Your voice matters. And the fate of the South Fork of the Salmon watershed in our community really will be based on how the Forest Service responds to critical questions and comments from you regarding how the mine may affect these resources in our community. So as you kind of start looking through the document, don't feel a need to read the whole thing from start to finish, but really put your skeptic's hat on and take a deep dive into some particular question of interest to you and look for other follow-up opportunities. Next slide. So the draft EIS, again, is going to be available until October 13th. We've actually asked for an extension of this because of a variety of issues. I don't know if any folks at home have kids and are trying to do some version of virtual school. But it's a challenging multitasking. And next slide. And then in terms of resources, there's actually a lot of resources out there of folks who are looking at the project. Of course, the Payette National Forest has their project site up, but I'd encourage folks to look at some following resources too. So the Nez Perce Tribe has a fantastic video on Dig for the Truth. We have resources on our website at Idaho Conservation League. Idaho Reviews United has a great resource as well. And then just kudos to the local crew up in McCall, the Save the South Fork Salmon, and they've done an outstanding job of really educating people about the risks of the project and the values of a restored South Fork Salmon River. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn it back to Anna to wrap up, and maybe we'll see how we are for time for other questions, but just want to thank everyone for your time.
Thank you, John. Let's see, I might have a little trouble. Yeah, I can't turn my video back on. I've got a little low bandwidth here, but you can just hear my voice. So I am gonna head over to our chat here, and I am not seeing any questions that have come up, but if you do have questions in the last few minutes that we are on, you're welcome to use that Q&A button. Anybody out there is, got something that they want to know more about. But otherwise, since I'm not seeing anything come through, I will just let you all know that I will be sending out, or you will receive via Zoom, a follow-up email after this. David says, thanks everyone for all your great work. You are so welcome. We're really glad to have you all here. So I will be tailoring our there's a little automatic message that goes out from Zoom thanking you all for joining us. I will be adding links to that message that contain all of the resources that John just mentioned in that last slide there. So if you want more information, you'll get it in that email. Look for that to come through tomorrow. And I really, really appreciate you all coming up here. We're glad to have you, and we're really happy to have everybody join us for these webinars. We really enjoy doing it. So again, I'm Anna Dimitriades with Advocates for the West, and we will be, we're doing these monthly now, so look for another announcement about our next social distancing hour in about a month. And with that, I will leave you all to your evening plans. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to our panelists again for a really wonderful presentation. Take care, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.